Welcome to Monologues by Hassie, where I'm going to be dropping unsolicited brain dumps from the depths of my grey matter. I'll talk about life, money, society, and self-development, plus whatever else lies up there, whilst hopefully not getting cancelled in the process. In the modern world of self-development, one of the most crucial things you can do into developing not only a well-rounded person, but somebody who's powerful, is something called talent stacking or skill stacking. And the first time I came across the term talent stacking was from a friend, and it led me to a book by the author of the cartoon Dilbert, Scott Adams, who has been cancelled now, but everyone gets cancelled, and the name of the book was How to Fail at Almost Everything and Still Win Big. And within this book, it introduces this concept of the talent stack. And the reason talent stacking is such a powerful thing is there's really a dichotomy when people go out there and try to succeed at something. I mean, let's take somebody who's an athlete. And when you look at an Olympian who's at the peak of their career, so they might be 25 or 30 years old, and let's take somebody who's been swimming, and they could have been training in swimming since they were, an early teenager and been doing it competitively. And by the time they get to the peak of their career, they're the world's best at swimming. They're in that top 1%, probably even higher than that. They're in the top 0.1% because they can compete at the Olympics. And that's a tremendous skill to have. And that's one path you can go down, where you pick a single skill or talent and you become one of the best persons in the world in that specific domain. And that's one approach. And from what I just described, it requires a lot of effort. And we already know that there's something called the law of diminishing returns, where the more we do of something, typically the less we get out of it. And it's a natural thing, and I do this all the time. We all do that. It's just different people have different cutoffs to when they want to stop doing something. Now, the talent stack says, rather than become the world's best at any one thing, what happens if you got to the top 25% or the top 20% of many different skills? And it really drives, that quote from Aristotle, the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. And let me give you an example. Let's take somebody who is an artist, and they create absolutely beautiful art. And there's always that meme about artists being starving artists, right? They have amazing art, and the value of their art jumps up after they die. And the reason it typically jumps up after they die is because somebody who's purchased their art is also great at telling the story of that artist's life and marketing. And as a result, the value of the artworks goes up. But imagine if we had an individual and they were an amazing artist and they decided that they were also going to learn how to do online marketing. All of a sudden, this artist has created a means to distribute their artwork. So whilst they might not be the world's best artist and they might not be the world's best online digital marketer, by combining those two skills, and provided they get to a proficiency where they are in the top 20 to 25% of the world, which if you put enough effort in, and knowing that majority of the people on this planet aren't going to put effort into that domain, you can probably get there in a few areas. This artist has now become an individual who has the ability to not only create art, but also market it. That is an incredibly valuable skill set to have. Now, that is, of course, a very abstract example. Well, it might not be abstract to you if you're listening to this and you're an artist, in which case perhaps digital marketing is a skill set that you want to get into. But if I look at my own life, and I've started to have this realization that very recently, I've always been on this kind of self-development and this binge where I'm always picking up skills. And this is partially driven by me just enjoying learning. It's part of my personality. It's just what I enjoy doing. If there's information, I'm the type of person who, even if it's the most random thing in the world, for whatever reason, if I find it even mildly interesting, I will at least find the bare minimum out about it, so that if I do meet an expert in that area, I can ask them questions about it and potentially learn even more and hopefully have an engaging conversation. And I realized that I've been learning all these kind of weird skills, and part of this is because I've studied so many kind of different things in university, and I don't currently use my degrees. I don't work in the fields that I studied my degrees in. So all my degrees were in the hard sciences and engineering, process engineering, chemical engineering, and chemistry and pharmacology. And right now I work in software, but I've also had gigs where I've done consulting for medical clinics, and I've just been able to have this really broad experience in different domains. And I had a magical week this week because for once it felt like everything was coming together. And there was this amazing synergy because whilst I'm not the best at anything, being able to have different areas of domain knowledge and be somewhat proficient in a few core areas is a very powerful combination, right? The whole is greater than the sum of the parts. And if I look at my current skill stack, and let's actually look at what happened when I transitioned into being a software engineer, I think one of the reasons why my company allowed me to transition to being a software engineer is, was I the best person at software engineering or coding? No, but I was proficient enough to code when I was working as the data analyst, and I made sure that I picked up a few core concepts like writing code cleanly. But I think what was really important is in 2021, I actually went to the National Institute of Dramatic Arts, and this was online during COVID. And in Australia, this is it's essentially a bunch of actors, and they, in addition to performing plays, they have a corporate unit where they teach acting skills to different contexts. And the course I did was a public speaking boot camp. And of course, that means that I can communicate with you better at this moment because I've had a bit of formal training. And if I look at the skill stack, I could code a bit and I could also speak to people, which means I can teach people. And I've taught in the past. I used to be a tutor. Now, I wasn't a good tutor when I started off, but because I've had experience and gotten better and realized the best ways to teach people and the worst ways to teach people, that's something where, again, I'm not the best teacher in the world, but I've formed the ability to be able to boil a concept into something that's simple enough and package it to people. So all of a sudden, I have somebody who's not the world's best coder, and I can speak to people. My public speaking skills are good, so I can talk to stakeholders in the organization. And I can also explain things to them because I've had experience in teaching and tutoring. And all of a sudden, the whole is greater than the sum of each part. If I was just meh at coding, well, they wouldn't really want anything to do with me, right? Because you can find somebody who's an amazing programmer. And if all I could do is public speaking, well, we're a technology organization, so it wouldn't make sense to have a public speaker, right? Not in those early initial stages of business. And if all I could do was teach, again, I might be the wrong person for an early stage of the business. But being able to combine a few different skill stacks gave me a valuable skill set where, as I developed and am developing my abilities in software engineering, I can still provide value because I have skills which might seem very unrelated at first, but when you put them together, they become very useful. So this is really what skill stacking is about. And let me throw another example out at you. Let's say you're an architect and you're really great at designing buildings. You're in the top 90% of architects. You're not the best, but you're pretty good. Now, if you're listening to this podcast, you can speak English. You may not be from an English-speaking country, but let's say that this architect only speaks English currently. Let's say the next talent or skill that this person wishes to pick up is a foreign language. So they go and learn Mandarin Chinese. All of a sudden, if this person spends enough time learning Mandarin and they get to a level where amongst foreign language speakers of Mandarin, that they are in the top 25%, so they're pretty good, they're conversational, they can even engage in business discussions, all of a sudden this person who's an architect in an English-speaking country has opened themselves to Mandarin Chinese speaking clients in their existing country, as well as opening doors to markets outside where they currently operate. And if you imagine that this person had a small architecture business, boom, they can now start working on projects in some of the most developing economies in the world, and they can market their services in China. And that's just an example of where you can take skills which seem very abstract and put them together. and you don't need to be the best at anything. And you see this all the time in really great professionals around you, especially people who've changed careers a few times. Because if they've changed careers well, what they're doing is they're actually bringing skills from different areas and applying them in their present life. Now, in relationships, people might say carrying that baggage around is a very bad thing. But when you look at the value you're able to create as a human being, having these different skills and experiences, especially if you actually invested time into becoming somewhat good at each one or becoming better at each one, now you can form a talent stack. And potentially, depending on what you do, whilst each talent might not be unique, right? So speaking Chinese is not unique. Being an architect is not unique. Knowing how to code, knowing how to create software, knowing how to speak publicly. Those are not unique talents, but if you put the right things together, all of a sudden you can become a very unique individual, and there are niche markets that you can tap into which are going to yield potentially better results than if you had only gotten good at a single talent. So if you're listening to this today, I want you to think about, what talents do you have? What would you say you're good at? And what do you think you could get good at, which is going to open up more opportunities? And it doesn't need to be something that's inherently obvious and that other people do. It can be whatever you want to do. But ideally, it would help if, it had some basis in something that you currently outsource, so you get advice on, and if you can take that over. And I don't mean take on more work, but if you're really good at maths, that's great. And if you get good at accounting and you understand accounting principles and you're good at math, boom, you're opening up a market. If you get good at marketing, well, now you can market your services as being a very strong mathematician who understands accounting principles. If you can speak publicly, all of a sudden, you can deliver content. And it's just one of these things which can make you incredibly powerful. So I guess I don't like giving anyone homework, but chances are, if you're listening to this right now, think about, what talents do you currently have and what other talents can you stack to become essentially a very powerful video game character? Because if we're in this video game of life, what can you do to be absolutely incredible? And I'll leave it there. And with that, I wish everyone listening to this great success on all your endeavors. You've just made it through another episode of Monologues by Hassie. It brings me great pleasure to know that you made it to the end. To listen to more episodes, subscribe on your favorite podcast app or visit monologuesbyhassie.com. Thanks for swinging by.